everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview and review, I'm taking a look at Spruance Leader, the Cold War Fleet Combat Solitaire Strategy game, designed by Dean Brown and published by DVG. DVG did provide this copy for me to review. Spruance Leader focuses on commanding and managing a naval task force in the Cold War setting of the 1980s and early 90s, simulating major naval conflicts in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. You will select a campaign and campaign length, which gives you a certain number of special operations points to spend. You'll spend those points on ships and ordnance, building your task force how you want to. You choose between frigates, destroyers, cruisers, and more. Once your task force is assembled, you draw from a target deck built from target numbers listed on the campaign sheet, and you go on missions. They can be escort missions, hunting an enemy wolf pack, dealing with enemy surface fleets, etc. Once you encounter an enemy task force during either a random engagement or reaching the target, the action switches to this tactical display. This is where you deploy the ships in your task force where you want, either the screening force, the main force, or the protected force. You then conduct the tactical battle itself. Depending on where your ship is on the tactical display, that will determine when they get to conduct their action. It'll give them different modifiers for certain actions, and ultimately how much stress and experience points they earn at the end of the battle. Before multiple missions, level up your ships and commanders, and try to earn victory points, and hope your ships and commanders survive until the end of the campaign. Now let's do a quick overview. I have a campaign playthrough video and mission and target mission playthrough videos available for an in-depth look at the game and how to play, but we'll do a quick overview. I'll cover my pros and cons, and then I'll end with my final thoughts. All right, if you're familiar with Leader's series of games, you may be able to skip this section. I will cover the tactical display, which is unique to this game a little bit, for the overall kind of campaigns, choosing them, spending points, purchasing, ships and ordnance, etc. Those are all pretty standard compared to other Leader games. You can go ahead and use the little links below on the timeline to skip ahead to my pros and cons and my final thoughts. For the rest of you guys, here we go. So first off, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and pick a campaign. The game comes, the base game box, and this is my review is based on, comes with a whole stack of different campaigns. Here we have one we can just look at for an example. North Atlantic Skirmishes, Cold War, 1988. Spruance Leader, and then you're going to use Atlantic ships. So you pick a campaign here. This says this one's easy. It's kind of recommended as a beginner campaign. Then you're going to pick a campaign duration, short campaign, medium campaign. That's going to give you how many targets you're going to go after, and then how many special operations or SO points you're going to spend. And then that's at the beginning. And then during each mission, which, 4 targets means 4 missions, you get 20 SO points, say in the short campaign, 22 in the medium campaign, which you can now purchase additional ships, ordnance, etc. With this campaign and with those targets in mind, which the targets, so you say you have, 4 targets, you're building a target deck out of the numbers that are shown here on the little campaign map. Those numbers match up to your target cards up in the top left corner here, 28 right here. Then you're going to shuffle them up. You're going to be drawing from them, choosing a target to go after. Now, you start off where the star is, you're with your task force. Wherever your mission was drawn, you're going to go ahead and place this marker. You're then going to be moving your task force here. And we'll cover what task forces are in a second. Now, there may be enemy task forces depending on what you have rolled. You may encounter them, in which case you do these encounter here, flip them over. You're going to roll to see what it is, high, low, or none. Flip it over, see exactly what's going to happen. Is it going to be enemy ships, enemy submarines, both, neither, etc.? And then when you are assembling the actual enemy, whether it's from based on the target, based on a random encounter, generally speaking, and there are some exceptions, you're going to be drawing from this enemy sub card deck or enemy ship card deck, and then placing them out on the tactical board here. So we have our campaign, right? And now we want to build our task force. Pretty simple. What you do is the game, like I said, comes with a whole bunch of different types of ships. Here we have things like, say, a Spruance class, the USS John Rogers. You have a Ticonderoga class cruiser, USS Leyte Gulf, right? And it's going to have a card, and it's going to have a chit. The chit is the part that gets placed out here in the task force deployment. Card itself, we'll look at them quick. You have, and again, if you're familiar with the Leader series, it should be pretty familiar. For those who don't, pay attention. There's a lot of information on here, but it's not that complicated. The SO cost, so remember we had those SO points you get for your campaign. That's how much it costs to purchase it. You do have to keep track of their level, their rank here. So A5 average, S5 skilled, and the 5 is how many XPs it takes to level up from, say, from average to skilled. It tells you the year. So when you have your campaign sheet, say if we're doing North Atlantic skirmishes 1988, you're going to have to pick, you're going to outfit both the ships you can purchase, and then also the enemy has to be 1988 and earlier, right? You can't have something that is not deployed till after. 1988 is a pretty late campaign age. You're going to have most of the equipment and most ships, although not all, in the game. Then when you look on your card for your ship, you're going to have these 3 different columns here. The leftmost one is detection and attack against other ships. The middle is against submarines, and the right is against aircraft. We'll get more into the detection aspect of that in a second here. But you're going to want to detect the enemy out here on the board. You have the ordnance that you're outfitting, which it tells you which ordnance you can. You still have to purchase it, but it tells you what you can place on that ship. There's going to be special things such as he could have this helicopter, T-LAMP, Tomahawk, vertical launch system, missile shield. The Ticonderoga class cruiser, right, was really good at anti-aircraft and protecting sort of the rest of the task force. And then his cool level, which can help mitigate stress. Speaking of stress, depending on how much stress the ship has, it tells you whether its status is okay or shaken, which then you have modifiers against ships, subs, air. You have modifiers based on the actual ship itself, noise modifier, torpedo defense, missile defense, number you have to roll to repair it, operates on oil or nuclear, and its hull strength, how many hits it can take. Again, this is just a broad outline of the game, an overview for an in-depth look at how all this operates and how this works together. You're going to go and want to check out my other videos, because I do a lot of good stuff in those videos. I have pop-ups and everything, so I think it'd be really good as a teaching tool. So, all right. So you're purchasing your ships, right? And you want to kind of figure out, okay, you're going to want a balance of ships, likely, right? You're purchasing ordnance for them. Again, like other Leader games, you're purchasing these ordnances. The bottom right number, instead of being the weight value is what it usually is, this is the value that it costs you. You're going to outfit it, again, depending on if a ship can support it or not. You have things like, say, this Mark 46 ASROC torpedo, RGM-84, a harpoon, anti-ship missile, RGM-109, Tomahawk anti-ship missile. You know, it's telling you, hey, the top right is a number you have to roll on a 1d10. It's a 1d10 based system to hit. Range, you have minimum range in red, maximum range in 3, and that's from your task force. Counting out here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are range markers. The things like harpoons and the tomahawks can actually be sent out on basically like a search. So if you haven't detected an enemy ship yet or an enemy submarine, you can send them out after them. Well, I guess against ships anyway. You wouldn't be firing them at submarines. And then, yeah, and you may have a ship that can do, say, or a munition that can do more than one hit. Like this Tomahawk here, 6 or 9. So if you roll 9 or higher, it's going to actually get 2 hits on the enemy, not just 1. All right, pretty basic there. All right, so you have your task force, you purchased your ordnance, you have your missions target, right? So like I said, so you maybe have a certain mission, a certain target you're going after, enemy wolf pack, enemy subs. It may tell you random subs. It may tell you exactly which subs to put out there. You are placing your ships where you want to within the task force here. And why it matters is that, like I said before, depending on where your ships are, it's going to determine, hey, do they get to act fast, which basically get to act before the enemy, or slow, which is after the enemy, or if they're in the support or protected, they don't get any actions, but it does help them recover from stress. When they're on here, you're putting the enemies, and generally speaking, it's going to be a random starting range, and then azimuth. You roll with some modifiers on the enemy cards. It's going to tell you a placement, a movement, and contact modifiers. You're placing them out here, and then turn by turn, up to 5, well, technically up to 6 turns for extended. You're going to have to go ahead and close in and eliminate the enemy, or possibly, if they aren't starred enemies, sometimes you can kind of disengage and just leave that enemy task force alone. Once you've gone on the number of missions the campaign sheet says, you're going to check your total victory points, because if you look at the mission card. It's going to tell you, hey, you successfully, say, eliminate, whatever, accomplish whatever the goal is, destroy all submarines. If you destroy all these, you get 6 victory points. You run through your however many you need to. So you pick the short campaign, 4 targets. So you complete 4 of these. You're going to go ahead and check on this table here to see how many and compare how many victory points you have and see your evaluation. Now, when you have the enemies out here, and again, I'm just going to do a broad overview here. So what you're doing is you have your fast action screening force go first. When you have the enemy out here, they're going to look like this on these chits, right? And they're going to have a separate marker. You're going to go ahead and place on the ship here to the side, right? Well, this is not detected yet. So while you may be able to launch certain missiles, let's say, to kind of search for them, they just basically head along that direction. What you're going to end up doing a lot of is detecting. And that's where the numbers on the detect are. And that's using your sonar, using your radar to detect the enemy ships. When you are rolling and you're detecting them, you have these markers. You get to put detection markers on them. If they're not detected, they can't be directly attacked. And they also are trying to target you, or detect you, which then allows them to target you. Detection 0, detect 1, detect 2. And if you notice in the bottom here, DM plus 2, it's going to give die roll modifiers depending on the level of detection. So if you have a higher detection, you're going to get better modifiers, right? It's easy you have a better lock on them, right? So your weapons have an easier time hitting them. Now they're going to be moving around according to an enemy movement chart, and then any modifiers on the card itself. And now you see something. This is an armed merchant ship. Obviously, there's going to be a freighter as well. There's going to be, here we go, CG, Variag, Akinda class. You're going to have enemy ships they're going to be firing at you, and some of them are going to be pretty tough, pretty vicious. They're going to have different attacks depending on whether they're targeting ships, subs, or aircraft. How does targeting work, you may say, or may ask? Well, you, right, basically get to pick the enemy as long as you've targeted them, as long as you have detected them, However, what do they do? How do they decide? Well, simple. Depending on what ships you have here, you're going to put chits in a cup, and it tells you how many chits per number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. You're going to have a chit cup for the enemy. You're going to draw from there, and it's going to tell you, okay, say he draws task force ship number 1. So whatever ship you have there, he's going to try to detect, and then if he does detect them, you may be attacking them based on the rules. Again, see my playthrough for a full in-depth. You get to see subs in action, ships in action, etc. They're going to be maneuvering around. You're going to see things like, okay, so enemies that want to avoid you may have a negative movement modifier. So when you're rolling a movement, it's not just totally random, right? You may think, well, does that mean that, a cargo ship's going to approach me? Whereas no, they're less likely to come towards you, more likely to move away from you, versus an enemy combat ship that can hurt you is more likely to move towards you. Also, you can see things like contacts. For instance, this actual combat ship will draw 2 contacts. This merchant will only draw 1. Okay. Now, after you complete your mission, so besides the end of the campaign, so in between, right, you're earning experience points and stress. You're applying them, depending on what you accomplished. Did you destroy enemy ships? Did you survive the mission? Were they involved in the screening force and main force, etc.? In addition, you have your commanders. Commanders are going to help you. You can send a commander out on a mission just one at a time, and they're gonna have special abilities, special things they can do. General actions, maybe just move a task force. So when you move them, maybe everything moves closer to you, or you can move it to the left or the right, depending. Task force redeployment, so redeploying your ships, screening force, main force supported, etc. Then you have other actions I don't have on these cards, which may be things like, you can grant an action to one of your ships, so one of your ships gets an additional action, etc. And there's, defense focus, anti-submarine warfare focus, etc. Multiple commanders to choose from and send on missions. Okay, that is a very, very broad, and I in no way covered it, how to play it exactly, anything like that. But I don't want to do that. I want to save that for my other videos for you guys to watch. I think it's good enough of an overview now. You understand, right? You're picking a campaign. You're outfitting a task force by picking ships, purchasing ordnance. You're going on missions. Based on the missions you're going to have, and based on, say, special rules that you're going to see on the campaign sheet, say, no allied carriers, no enemy air attacks. One target requires T-LAMs, tomahawks. That say no enemy air attacks. You don't have to focus on anti-air, focus on anti-ship, anti-submarine. That's going to help you. Little hint, hint. When you're outfitting, purchasing ordnance, don't buy a bunch of anti-aircraft missiles. Buy the ordnance that you are going to need. Based on those factors, you're going to build up your task force. You're going to send them out on your missions. You're going to try to avoid getting hit. If you get hit, you're going to go ahead. You're going to be drawing from this cup, and it's going to tell you, hey, depending on what you got hit by, do you hit by a missile? Oh, you take 2 stress, and you take an actual hit to the hull. On the other side is the same. It's going to have the other types, so torpedo and gun as well. Lose next action for that ship, and he takes a hit. Ouch, that hurts. So don't get hit or try to avoid it as much as possible. You're drawing. A lot of times it's going to be a random ship or sub, although occasionally, for instance, this wolf pack tells you exactly 1 kilo, 2 Foxtrot, 1 Kula. Sometimes you're going to have it where it'll say just 4 submarines, right? Although one last thing for submarines, technically, if it doesn't tell you exactly which one, instead of drawing right away, you actually draw from this chit cup. You have this marker, enemy sub. You don't know what it is. Once it gets detected or it detects you, you flip it over and you're going to roll. See, neutral, enemy, nothing. So it may be a phantom. It may be, hey, I think there's a couple subs out there. One of them you may roll and end up with nothing. It's gone. The other one may be neutral, or it could be the enemy, and you're going to have to deal with it. So hopefully that's a good enough overview, at least having a general idea of how the game works. That's, I think, enough of that. So let's go to my pros and cons. Cons first, as always. All right, let's get the only real con out of the way. The rulebook for Spruance Leader is a disappointing step back, and it hurts both learning the game and attempts to look up gameplay questions. We can go back a few years to Corsair Leader to see a leader rulebook that people really struggled with. However, afterwards, I saw a big improvement. Zero Leader, for example, had a much better rulebook, and I was looking for that to continue. With that expectation in mind, Spruance Leader's rulebook disappoints. A good rulebook should allow you to play the game from the sequence of play within the rulebook, especially with a solitaire game. Unfortunately, with Spruance Leader, you really can't. You're going to find yourself bouncing around between the sequence of play and prior sections of the rulebook and sections after the sequence of play. You're going to try not to miss steps or exclusive rules, but odds are when you're first playing and your first few times playing, you are going to. Some examples. The relation between starred unknown sub-chits. So look at here. The relation between the star on the chit and then stars on the cards. There is no relation. You can go ahead and basically ignore that. Now there's confusion regarding when to award XPs to ships and when not to. Some confusion around what detected means in reference to the detection system. Until you understand it, sometimes the initial impression is, wait, what does detected mean? What number on detection is it? And how does detection 0 happen? You learn those things eventually, but starting off, you don't quite get it right away. At least I know I didn't, and I saw multiple people online have the same problem. You have questions about how damage is applied, both to the enemy ships and to yourselves. How ordnance ammunition, can it be refilled? When can it be refilled? And finally, the rules for helicopters are a little vague. There are things the rules don't exactly prohibit. For instance, using a helicopter to check for subs, because helicopters get multiple actions. You will say all your actions in one turn. But the designer has come out and said, first he said he doesn't recommend doing it. Now he has, with the new rulebook, updated to say you can't. Having those limitations in a rulebook initially, right at first, would have gone a long way. You get the idea. In my experience, the rules don't make the game unplayable. It's not about missing information or errata for the most part. Instead, it just takes that extra effort to make sure you're playing the game correctly, primarily by rereading sections of the rulebook and checking online for clarification, things that could have been solved by a better rulebook from the beginning. Again, this isn't the type of rulebook that has a lot of mistakes, right? It's just the type of rulebook that makes the game harder to learn and play than it should be, simply due to missing information in certain places, although you'll find it somewhere else, and lack of clarification in others. I will say that the designer, Dean Brown, he's very active on Board Game Geek and on the game's Facebook group, making sure the questions are being answered. He has even already released an updated rulebook. I downloaded the PDF, and there's multiple changes. Everything's in blue text. And then what I do is with the downloaded PDF, I just access it on my tablet and I search for any terms to find them in that rulebook when I have questions. Same thing on BGG. I just search for a term and hopefully find the question has been answered. Second con, there are some small quality of life issues as well. One example, and I talked about this already when I did my overview, is drawing damage counters for damage against your task force ships. They say either torpedo or missile. Well, the enemy ships also can inflict gun damage. Well, which side do you use? Well, it's written in the rulebook, right? Somewhere in the rulebook, it tells you to check the torpedo side for gun damage. Why doesn't it just say torpedo/gun? Make the text a little smaller. You'll be able to fit gun in there. It's only 3 extra letters. I would much rather have it on here than have to just look it up. And I had people asking on Facebook, on Board Game Geek, how do you inflict gun damage? Is it just all one automatic damage? No, you have to check the torpedo side of the chit. It shouldn't have been this way. Another is the action and action use chits. So game comes with 4 of them. Now the designer has says these are only for the commander to keep track of his actions. But why? They're a fantastic way to keep track of which of your naval units has taken an action. You can look at another one of DVG's games, Warfighter, to see how helpful action counters are. I just wish they had taken some of the blank counters from the counter sheets, which there are a ton, right? And instead of having only 4 of these, look at that. You could have had another 5. These are all blank. What do you know? There's more blank ones down here as well. Like, make more of these. Why didn't you? It makes no sense whatsoever. I feel it's just like a very simple thing, but it's, again, we're talking about quality of life stuff, right? Quality of life. Why don't these have gun on them? And why do we not have more of these action chits? I had to take some of the blank ones here, and I just wrote action and action used on them. Very ridiculous that I had to do that. Easy, it's an easy fix, right? But they sure don't look nice. They don't look as nice as the counters that come with the game. And finally, the printing on the tactical board up here, depending on your light, it's a little dark. So if you have plenty of light, it's not an issue. But if it is a little darker when you're playing, sometimes it can be hard to read both of those tables. Okay, that's it for my cons. On to my pros. First off, the components are excellent all around. Mounted display, individually, die cut counters, etc. Obviously, the quality is top notch, is expected from DVG at this point, but so is the overall graphic design. Everything looks clear, looks nice. Get these out of the way. I think the tactical display board, when I first saw the green on here and the black, I was like, I don't know it looks really good. It's super clear, and it stays in the background nicely. So when you have, these don't be here, but when you have chits out here and you have weapons and you have things going on, everything is super clear and easy to see and easy to read. Same thing with the cards. Cards are nice. Yeah, there's a lot of information on here, but it's super clear and easy. As soon as you understand it, it just clicks and you have it down. Boom, you know exactly. Ships, subs, aircraft, what numbers to apply. Very simple. A lot of information on here, but it just works for the game itself. Now, the components aren't perfect. For instance, I already mentioned the text on the top right, which I think on my video looks pretty clear. Just be aware that occasionally it could be dark if you don't have enough light. I just have a lot of light going on right now. Also, there's a bit of errata on the board here. So here you have sequence of play engagement. This is during kind of the engagement here, the tactical engagement. Where it says engagement complete, this is the post-engagement steps. Here, number 3, move enemy units. Well, that's the same as move enemy units 3 here. It should not say that. It should say repair ships. That is when you are able to repair your ships. There's no longer any enemies to move because this is after the encounter. So an unfortunate bit of errata, but it's only one line. Just remember that step here. You're not moving enemy units, which there aren't going to be any at that point. That's when you're allowed to repair your ships. Secondly, focusing on the tactical display here and the way you set up your task forces, it is an elegant design from Dean Brown. I talked about before, you have the option to place your ships in 3 different sections of your task force. Depending on where they are, that determines when they act. Are they fast and they're acting before the enemy, or slow and they're acting afterwards? And it gives them modifiers for things like detection. It also determines the likelihood of them being targeted by the enemy with the clever use of that contacts and the chit cup, right? Drawing from it and seeing who the enemy ships are targeting. Ships in the screening force, as I mentioned, get 3 ships in the cup. Ships over here in the main force are only going to have 2 chits in the cup. And finally, anything in the protected force, there's only going to be 1, so they're much less likely to be targeted. That also means your frontline ships are more likely, although not guaranteed, right, to be the ones targeted. It's a simple but realistic way to show that positioning within a task force has consequences. I also do love how the detection system works once you understand it. Basically, ships and subs, both yours and the enemy, they start off, they're not detected. You then conduct detection actions with your ships, including, helicopters, right? And they can fly out here and try to detect submarines. However, it's not just detected or not detected. There are those levels, right? I showed you before, 0, 1, 2, 3. And those levels are going to grant bonuses to the attacker. So if they are detected at a higher level, it's going to be easier to attack them. But detection degrades over time. So if a battle drags on, you may lose your ability to target an enemy ship and vice versa. However, a fun exception to the detection requirement is, as I talked about already, is some anti-ship weapons, like the Harpoon and the anti-ship Tomahawk, can be launched in search mode. Now, it's harder for them to hit an enemy ship. They have a higher 2-hit number when they're in that mode. But you don't always need to have detected the enemy before you launch a volley of missiles in their direction. Again, you're combining realism with an easy mechanic to give you options without overwhelming you with rules. Spruance Leader, honestly, is full of such examples. Now, finally, the base game, it has a ton of content. Look at my campaign video and my playthrough video to see all the stuff that's in it. Just leafing through all this content, right? Cards and chits and campaign sheets, etc. Now, for this and for my playing, I found myself just focusing on the base game and everything it has to offer. And if that's all you ever purchase, that's all you will ever need. There are dozens of hours of gameplay in the box, if not more. In fact, this review, like I said, is based entirely on the base game and what it has to offer. However, if you do want to expand your gameplay and options, there are 3 expansions to choose from: submarines, carriers, and allies. It's nice that the Spruance Leader base game box has all the gameplay and content you could ever need, but if your need becomes a want for more, you have the 3 expansions to help expand the experience. Okay, I can keep going on, but I think that's enough for now. Let's go ahead and wrap up this review with my final thoughts. Spruance Leader has become my favorite game in the Leader series. It's just that good of an experience. The tactical gameplay has important decisions to be made nearly every turn, with a good balance between risk and reward. Do I push an attack and launch missiles and torpedoes, or do I work on increasing my detection of enemy ships and subs to improve my future chances of attack? And managing your ship's positions within the task force, juggling ship stress in particular, is equally as important during a campaign. The game is not without its flaws. See my cons where I talk about those, with my primary issue stemming from the poor rulebook. And you should be aware of it in case that sort of issue is a deal breaker for you. But there are 2 things to keep in mind. 1, if you're watching this review and trying to decide if you should purchase the game or not, understand the designer has already released an updated rulebook and a list of clarifications. There are dozens of questions answered on Board Game Geek and the game's Facebook page, so you have plenty of resources to use. Secondly, and those who watch my reviews know this, for someone who is as critical of poor rulebooks as I am, even I was won over by Spruance Leader and its gameplay. And that should tell you something. The way Dean Brown has created tense tactical battles, even just while using the venerable Leader system, deserves recognition. It's on the more complex spectrum of Leader games, so if you are looking to get into the Leader system for the first time, I still generally recommend a game like Hornet Leader. But as soon as you're ready for that next step, or if you want to dive right into the deep end, Spruance Leader is a game you don't want to miss. Alright, thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video review. Please let me know what you think of my video and this game in the comments below. And until next time, everybody, later.